In an emergency, you know, if I clutch my chest and drop to the floor, don't form a committee and ask, what are our options here? You know, that's just, you know. But with discretion, you know, the answer is, what do you think you should do? And if you think back, you know, most of us, when we ask that question, what should we do about this? We already know the answer. We're not asking for information. We're asking maybe for permission to do it. But we have a pretty good sense of what should be done. I'll tell you a hint. In all our leadership training, this is the easiest thing to change. Some of the other stuff, you know, teach people how to have integrity, how to be motivational and all that, that's a little tougher. Intellectual stimulation, really easy to change. We tell leaders very specifically, ask 5 questions a day. Just start there. Rudy Giuliani changing the crime profile of Manhattan started by asking questions. The last element we talk about is individualized consideration. It's treating people as people. It's my pet peeve. We're not human resources, we're not talent, we're not personnel, we're not any of those things, we're people. So here's a test if you do this well. It's a very Canadian test because good Canadians all stop it on the way to work in the morning and they get a coffee at Tim Hortons. And most of us go to the same Tim Hortons every day, and most of us are sold the coffee by the same person every day, and the question is, what is that person's name? And if you don't know, you're not paying attention, because they wear a great big name tag. Right? So you should know. Sometimes we don't pay attention. Now, I'm really bad at this, you know. I'm not a big fan of the Myers-Briggs and tests like that, but there is actually, on the Myers-Briggs, if you know there's the personality profiles, there's an academic profile, right? Introverts to the extreme, right? So I'm really bad at attending to other people. We run a management training certificate in Kelloway in Nunavut, and I was going up, I was a last-minute fill-in, I was going up to teach the human rights segment of the diploma, and I don't know a lot about Nunavut human rights legislation, so I was on the plane and I was reading, you know, studying up for the workshop I had to give the next day. And this woman got on the plane in Ottawa and she sat next to me and she said, "Oh, that looks like interesting stuff you're reading." And I thought, oh, God, she's going to talk. I don't have time for this, you know, so I'm trying to yeah, and I just kept my head down. And she tried a couple more times, I just ignored her. And finally we got the plane's starting to land in Iqaluit, so I start packing up my stuff. And finally I get to talk to the woman who was the Human Rights Commissioner for the territory of Nunavut. And if I wasn't such a bonehead, right, sometimes we just don't do that well. Right? We were doing, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll end on one more story. Always strikes me as amazing. We were doing a focus group for the military years and years ago. And we were talking about stress in the military. They don't like to talk about stress so much. And we were doing a focus group with warrants and sergeants in Kingston, Ontario. So it's all fairly senior people. And you could tell, just from their attitude as they came in the room, they were just thrilled to come in and talk to a psychologist for 2 hours. They were so happy to be. Oh, it was one of the worst mornings of my life. Anyways, at the end, because we had them talk about stress for 2 hours, and we didn't want to send them home depressed. So at the end, we said, let's go once around the table. Tell me the best day you ever spent in the military. And this one guy is a chief warrant officer, an RSM, Regimental Sergeant Major, and he said, you know, the best day I ever had, 37 years in the military, was a change of command parade at Kingston. One colonel's going out, new guy's coming in. And they do this parade thing. You've seen the Queen do this, inspecting the troops, right? So they're all lined up in the parade square, and they're going on, and they stop every second or third person and talk. Anyways, the new general or whatever stopped in front of this guy and said, so what do you do for us, Chief? What's your job? So the guy explained what he did for his job, and the general stuck out his hand and he said, thank you. And he walked away, and the guy said, and that's the best day I've ever had in 37 years. So, we can learn one of two things. One, life in the military sucks. If that's your best day, think about your worst. Oh my God. Or think about how important that is. Think about how important that is that someone acknowledges your work, takes the time to say thank you. The other goal we set for leaders all the time, tell 5 people a day they're doing a good job. It's a sneaky thing to do. Because they think, well, what possible effect can that have on people just to hear that they're having a good job? Well, A, it does have an effect, but the real difference is actually in the leader. Because you know what? Most people in organizations are doing the right thing most of the time. And we never hear about it. You mess up once. That's when you hear about it, right? So we're really good at pointing at the bad things. We're really good at giving the constructive feedback. What about just giving positive feedback? That's treating people like people. You know, if you're at home, you can't follow someone around criticizing everything they do. Or if you do, you're going to be in trouble. Right? Works the same in the workplace. Nobody needs that. So it's that notion of just recognizing that people are people. They have interests outside of work. They have lives outside of work. They have the same needs that all of us have. I think if we can get leaders doing those 4 things, you know, to return to the original theme of how do you create a climate of inclusion, leadership's a verb. It's what you do. Right? It doesn't have to do with the position you're in. Friends of mine did a really neat study. They were interested. Comes up, I'm sure you've heard this in the news. It comes up every year about this time. Flu vaccines. How do we get healthcare workers to take flu vaccines, right? Because a lot of healthcare workers don't want to take them. So friends of mine did a study where what they did in the first instance is they said, we're going to find out who the leaders, the thought leaders in the organization are. And what was really interesting is they simply went around a hospital and they started asking people, you know, who do people listen to? Who's influential around here? And it comes as a shock to all of us that it's not always the senior leaders and the people with the formal titles, right? It's often the person who, if you looked at an organizational hierarchy, they're at the bottom of the hierarchy. They're at the bottom of the formal power structure, but they're the person that people listen to. And they influence other people's opinions. And my friend's idea in the research was if you can get those people on board, they will then influence others. Right? And that's exactly how it played out. So if leadership is about what you do, then we have to start thinking about what is it that good leaders do? Right? So that's been, now I'm going into full professor mode. That's been a question for about 100 years now in the academic literature. We've gone through all kinds of versions of what leaders do, and all of them had some elements of truth, and sometimes people were simply wrong. And you know, for years and years and years, we've cycled around this question. Now I think we actually have a pretty good understanding. So we talk about this model of transformational leadership, and again, that's a term that gets tossed around a lot, and we're never quite sure what it means. I use it to refer to a very particular theory of leadership. It was developed by 2 guys, Burns and Bernie Bass. Excuse me. And one of the interesting things they did was to look at all of the, at the time, this was about the 1970s, they looked at all of the extant theories of leadership, and they said, so what is leadership? And they actually distilled it down to, I think, 4 very identifiable qualities. And one of the things I always do, I do a lot of leadership training, so we always start with an exercise, and it comes in various flavors, but the one I like to use now, I could have done it this morning because you're all sitting in groups. So what we do is we have every group write a speech. So I'll give you 20 minutes. I want you to write the speech to nominate the leader of the year. I want you to tell me what a good leader does. Why would someone deserve that award as Leader of the Year? Right? And then I say, in most of my classes, I say, so I'll give you 20 minutes to do that, and then I'll come back, and one person from each group has to deliver the speech. So that means you get 5 minutes to write it and 15 to fight over who's going to have to talk. That's usually how it plays out. So that's a really interesting exercise for me, because when we do that, we get exactly the same answers no matter who is in the room. I do this with MBA students. I've done it with senior executives. We've done it with kids in grade 4. We ran workshops at one point for CUPE shop stewards. Doesn't matter what the industry is, doesn't matter who's in the room or what their formal job is, we get the same answers all the time. And that's sort of saying, a big question for academics is, do we know what leadership is? And I'd say, yeah, very clearly, because we all give the same answers. We all recognize the same things as being good leadership. We may not always do them, but we can at least tell you what they are. And that's what Burns and Mass were focused on, is what are those common qualities that we all identify. They actually wrote, their first book was called Leadership and Performance Beyond Expectations, because their notion was very much like, you know, if you watch the Olympics or you watch some sporting event where somebody wins a big prize, they'll often say, you know, I got to give credit to my coach. They got me to do more than I thought I could do. They raised my expectations so I could do more than even I thought I could do. Right? We have tons of research on this. There's more research on transformational leadership than all those other theories combined. So, you know, we teach undergrad OB classes, and there's 2 weeks on leadership. It's 2 chapters in the book, and we go through the 17 theories. And at the end, you say, by the way, none of those work. You can see your teaching evaluations go down. Right? This one, there's good evidence. We've used it a lot in all kinds of organizations. I now think of it as evidence-based leadership. I think if you're talking about leadership in organizations, there's now just so much evidence around transformational leadership, you're pretty close to malpractice if that's not what you're talking about. So what's transformational leadership? It's we talk about the 4 I's. There are 4 very distinct things that leaders do. One, now Bass and Burns, academics, they come up with weird titles for things. So the first dimension they talk about is idealized influence. Idealized influence is doing the right thing. I always say, you know, one of the most amazing things in organizations, and again, it doesn't matter what outcome you look at or what type of organization, but almost invariably you find that leaders in organizations get what they want. And when you say that to leaders in organizations, they say, no. You know, I talk about this, but I never get that. I often think leaders get what they actually want, not necessarily what they say they want. So there's a famous article in organizational behavior called On the Folly of Rewarding A While Hoping for B, right? Well, leaders often do that. We talk about one thing when what we want is something else. We talk about safety, but really what we emphasize is production, right? So the question then is, do we really, every time we do the Leader of the Year award, every time we do an exercise to get the qualities of a good leader, somebody will say, a good leader walks the talk. A good leader says what they're going to, or does what they said they were going to do. Because here's the secret, you know? If you're in a leadership role in organizations in particular, you're in a spotlight, and people are watching what you do. They're watching what you do all the time. Right? If you're in a workplace where you have a lunchroom or a coffee room, sometimes you go in there and they all stop talking. They're talking about you. You know, when I was younger, I used to work at a hospital. What did we talk about at the breaks? You talked about the supervisor. right? When she came in the room, you stopped talking about the supervisor, right? We now tell leaders, you think of all your employees, think of all the people who report to you, think of each one of them as your own personal stalker. Because they're watching everything you do, they're listening to everything you say, and it's influencing. Right? It's influencing even though you may not intend it. Right? I always say there's a great test of this, by the way. If you don't believe that you're having an impact like that, when you go to work or go to a social function or something, whenever you see 4 or 5 people gathered together, say 4 people, go over and say hello to 3 of them, and then just walk away. What do you think that 4th person does? They spend the rest of the time saying, why is she mad at me? What did I do to her? Don't do that, by the way. It's very bad. Right? But it shows the importance, the influence that we have on other people. Right? And it speaks to this notion that leaders not only have to talk the talk, they have to walk it. They have to actually do something. We often talk about, showing the sort of physical or the behavioral commitment to something. And it's not only getting up and making a speech about how important inclusion is or something. What are you actually going to do about it? Because at the end of the day, that's what counts, is what leaders do. We often communicate that in all kinds of symbols. One of my favorite stories, because I do work in safety, one of my favorite stories is around DuPont. DuPont is a chemical manufacturer, as you might know, and they make all kinds of things, some not so nice, and some of them blow up. But they actually have a pretty good safety record, right? In fact, they've spun off a consulting firm to teach people how to manage safety. And one of the most striking things about the firm is when you get a memo from their CEO, it's signed by their CEO and chief safety officer. Now that's a small thing, but what they're saying, what the leader of the organization is saying, safety is so important to our organization, it reports to the CEO's office. Everywhere else, and if you're one of those people, I'm sorry, but everywhere else, safety is somebody over in HR, right? And they don't have much direct authority in the organization. There's 10 levels between them and the top. Right? But at DuPont, the chief safety reports directly to the CEO. Right? So it's all about how you actually do this. This famous story of Rudy Giuliani. Before the events of September 11th, one of the things Giuliani was known for was cleaning up Manhattan and sort of getting the crime off the streets. And he did a lot of fairly questionable things, frankly. At one point, he was busing homeless people to New Jersey, which is not a great solution for social ills. But one of the things he did around crime statistics, he talks about in this book, he started at every time he had a weekly meeting with the borough chiefs for the 5 boroughs of New York, and at every meeting he asked about their crime statistics. What do the numbers look like? Are they up? Are they down? What are we doing? And what that started was because he asked at every meeting, when they went back to their operation, they started asking at every meeting. Right? I know I'm going to meet with the mayor next week. He's going to ask me this. Get me an answer. What do our numbers look like? And it started to drive the whole agenda through the organization. Because one person at the top took an interest in something and started displaying that, it started to change the way the whole organization worked. So they really started to focus in. Right? How do we create a climate of inclusion? Starts at the top. It starts when the boss, when the person at the top starts saying, what are we doing about this? Right? And starts making people accountable for that and saying, let's go now. What do we do? One of the most amazing changes in recent years, one of the fastest growing changes I've seen in all the years I've been working in this area, is what we're doing in mental health in the workplace. 10 years ago, it wasn't on the table. Nobody was talking about it. And it's like overnight, I said, I'm doing all these conferences. I'm doing all these conferences because everybody now wants to talk about mental health in the workplace. We have legislation changing in a lot of provinces. We have court cases, a whole body of jurisprudence. We have the work of the Mental Health Commission. We have the new standard from the Canadian Standards Association on psychosocial issues. All of those things are coming together. And, you know, if I wanted to trace that back, I think it really traces back to the Mental Health Roundtable, where a group of leaders started to get together and say, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to take this seriously? So, you know, we've been talking about it for years, but now when the rubber hits the road, what are we going to actually do? That's idealized influence. We talk about inspirational motivation, which is raising people's expectations. Expectations are probably the most powerful thing we know about, right? So we always say, you know, we get what we expect. Now, not always. I keep expecting to win the lottery, and that's just not working out for me so far. But in a lot of areas, we get exactly what we expect. I do a lot of leadership coaching, and one of the most interesting things, we've done this for years, we'll do a 360 assessment where leaders are rated by their employees and their peers and their coworkers. And so I gather up all this data, and before I share it with the leader, I'll often ask the person, say, tell me about the place you work at, tell me about the people you work with. And before I even look at the data, if the person starts off with, oh, you know, my unit has all the troublemakers in the organization, right? Oh, we're always fighting fires. There's always something. There's always some kind of strife going on. You know, every day's a battle. Without even looking at the scores, I know that person's leadership scores are really low. Because what we've seen over and over again in the years is people who get rated really highly by their subordinates and their coworkers and their peers and their boss. The people who get identified as really strong leaders in the organization, when I ask them, tell me about the people you work with, they say, I work with the greatest bunch of people. They don't even need me there. They just go ahead and do it. I just, you know, manage the circus sort of thing, right? What's going on? You get what you expect. When you expect people to be great, they become great. And when you expect them to be lousy, they become lousy. Right? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This has nothing to do with leadership, but it's my favorite story about expectations, so I got to tell you it. A friend of mine does alcohol research at the University of Western Ontario. So every September, he posts signs all over campus. Come into my lab and get drunk, and I'll pay you $50. He's got lineups right to Detroit. Right? So the setup is, students come into the lab, and they're going to have some kind of experimental task. And one of the common ones used to be a pursuit rotor. Anybody remember what a turntable is, a record turntable? Okay, well, for some of you, the needles just go scratch, scratch, but it used to be they went per round. So pursuit rotor is a record turntable, and we put a little tape on it, and we give you a stick, and we say, hold the stick to the tape. So you have to follow it as the turntable rotates, right? You probably don't do this at your parties, but you can. When people are drunk, that's really hard to do. Right? It's a Friday night thing. Anyway, so my friend takes people into the lab, randomly assigns people to conditions, so half the people get the alcohol, enough to make them impaired, and they get the pursuit rotor task, and they're lousy. They're all over the place. Maybe that's how scratching was invented, actually. The other half doesn't get alcohol, but you have to give them something. We need a placebo condition, right? A control condition. So they get a glass of orange juice that's doctored up to taste funny, like it has alcohol in it. Now, here's the amazing thing. About 30% of the control group gets drunk. The people who got the doctored up orange juice got drunk. And you say, how can you possibly get drunk? You didn't have any. They expected to get drunk. It's the definition of a placebo condition. We give you something that has no effect. You expect it to have a certain effect, and it does. Right? These people stagger, they slur their words, they're lousy at the pursuit rotor task. The next day, they will tell you they have a hangover. They have every sign of being drunk except for one. they have 0 blood alcohol level because they never had any alcohol. Right? You watch some of the drug research we do, you know, everybody doing drug research, when you bring a new drug to market, they're doing all these double-blind placebo-controlled studies. The reason they're doing that is simply to control expectations. They spend millions and millions of dollars trying to control expectations. We know not only if you expect to get a drug that helps that you'll get better, but sometimes, even if I know which drug you're getting, if I know you're getting the alcohol or the doctored up orange juice, somehow I communicate that to you. Right? It's not like my friend, you know, is saying to the control group, here's your drink. You know, we're not doing that. It's not manifest, it's not that visible. Somehow we communicate that expectation. So second thing, inspirational motivation. Raise people's expectations about what can be done. Right? And safety. The biggest change that happens in my lifetime? We stop saying accidents happen. That used to be okay. It used to be okay to say accidents happen, and then we say, no, it's not. They don't. And by the way, don't use that word accident. Now it's incidents. Right? But we've gotten away from that. No, we've changed our expectation about how we understand the world. We talk about intellectual stimulation. A friend of mine who I do research with says this is the forgotten child of leadership theory. Intellectual stimulation is getting people to think about old problems in new ways. Right? So especially when we're talking about inclusion, that should really resonate, because what do we have to rethink? So maybe we have to rethink how we do certain jobs. Maybe there isn't one way to do a job. Right? So intellectual stimulation is getting people to think. And, you know, most organizations, we've done a really bad job at this. What we've said, at least implicitly to employees in many organizations, is stop thinking. Check your brain at the door. And they will tell, I do a lot of surveys, focus groups, they will tell you this. Right? You ask them a question, they say, they don't pay me to make that decision. That's why so-and-so makes the big bucks. They don't pay me to think. Right? Because we've taught people to stop thinking. We said, just do the job, do it the way I tell you to do it, and that's the answer. And that's great as long as nothing in your world will ever change. But the smallest change is going to throw you off course. Remember a couple of years ago, there was a guy, I forget what he tried to do, set his underwear on fire or his shoes or something, and on a plane, not just in general. I need to work on the context of these stories. Anyways, bomber on a plane, and as a result of which, Transport Canada, the transportation authorities in every country said you can't carry liquids on a plane. Right? So you still see, if you go through the security checks at the airport, you still see big cans there filled with half-drunk bottles of water and things, because, you know, you're only allowed 100 milliliters or something. So it's interesting when that happened. About that same time, we were doing some training for Clearwater Foods. You know, Clearwater runs the lobster pound at the airport. They have a good, nice business there. You're ever on a plane to Calgary, or, you know, every second person is getting on with a dozen lobster. Right? Or going to Ontario. So here was the problem. Transport Canada said, ice is water. We can debate their knowledge of physics, but you're not allowed to carry ice on the plane. Do you know what happens to lobster if you don't pack them in ice for a 12-hour flight to Calgary? The passengers really complain when the gooey starts dripping down on their head. So they have a real problem. Their business is shut down overnight because they can't pack their lobster in ice anymore. Anyone know the answer? They didn't go out of business. I'll give you a hint. No, they weren't allowed to use ice packs. Sorry? Not dry ice, but I heard someone say frozen peas. Frozen peas and carrots. That was the answer. Because if you've ever sprained your knee or sprained your ankle or sprained something that looks funny and it's hard to get a Band-Aid on it, the doctor will say, put a bag of frozen peas on it. Because they're small enough that they'll wrap around. And you know, lobster, they're sort of funny shaped, right? They're not nice square boxes that stack. So the peas and carrots would fill in around them. At one point, someone told me Clearwater had on their webpage a recipe for peas, carrots, and lobster. So you could use the whole thing. But if you think about it, that's a brilliant solution. That's somebody who thought. We always say think out of the box. That's someone who thought out of the box. That's someone who looked at a huge problem for the organization. I mean, it sounds really small, right? You can't use ice. It shut down their whole business. Right? These are people who are going to lose their jobs. This is a profitable revenue stream that's going out of business because we can't use ice anymore. Someone came up with the answer because they thought about it differently. So how do we get people to think? Here's a hint. You're thinking now. What did I just do? I asked a question. We tell leaders over and over and over again, we have the wrong model. We have the model that leaders are supposed to know the answers. Leaders are not there to know the answers. The role of a leader is to get other people to know the answers. So that's tough for a lot of us because we get to a leadership position because we know stuff. And now that I'm here, I want to prove that I know stuff. That's not the job anymore. So now we tell leaders when we do leadership training, what's the answer when somebody says, what should we do about this? The answer is, what do you think you should do? Always. Well, use with discretion. Someone says, what time is it? Don't say, what time do you think it is? It's just bad. In an emergency, you know, if I clutch my chest and drop to the floor, don't form a committee and ask, what are our options here? You know, that's just, you know. But with discretion, you know, the answer is, what do you think you should do? And if you think back, you know, most of us, when we ask that question, what should we do about this? We already know the answer. We're not asking for information. We're asking maybe for permission to do it. But we have a pretty good sense of what should be done. I'll tell you a hint. In all our leadership training, this is the easiest thing to change. Some of the other stuff, you know, teach people how to have integrity, how to be motivational and all that, that's a little tougher. Intellectual stimulation, really easy to change. We tell leaders very specifically, ask 5 questions a day. Just start there. Rudy Giuliani changing the crime profile of Manhattan, started by asking questions. The last element we talk about is individualized consideration. It's treating people as people. It's my pet peeve. We're not human resources, we're not talent, we're not personnel, we're not any of those things, we're people. So here's a test if you do this well. It's a very Canadian test because good Canadians all stop it on the way to work in the morning and they get a coffee at Tim Hortons. And most of us go to the same Tim Hortons every day, and most of us are sold the coffee by the same person every day, and the question is, what is that person's name? And if you don't know, you're not paying attention because they wear a great big name tag. Right? So you should know. Sometimes we don't pay attention. Now, I'm really bad at this. You know, I'm not a big fan of the Myers-Briggs and tests like that, but there is actually, on the Myers-Briggs, if you know, there's the personality profiles, there's an academic profile, right? Introverts to the extreme, right? So I'm really bad at attending to other people. We run a management training certificate in Kelloway in Nunavut, and I was going up, I was a last-minute fill-in, I was going up to teach the human rights segment of the diploma, and I don't know a lot about Nunavut human rights legislation, so I was on the plane, and I was reading, you know, studying up for the workshop I had to give the next day. And this woman got on the plane in Ottawa, and she sat next to me, and she said, "Oh, that looks like interesting stuff you're reading." And I thought, "Oh, God, she's going to talk. I don't have time for this, you know." So I'm trying to yeah, and I just kept my head down. And she tried a couple more times. I just ignored her. And finally, we got the plane starting to land in Kelloway, so I start packing up my stuff. And finally, I get to talk to the woman who was the Human Rights Commissioner for the territory of Nunavut. And if I wasn't such a bonehead, right, sometimes we just don't do that well. Right? We were doing, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll end on one more story. Always strikes me as amazing. We were doing a focus group for the military years and years ago. And we were talking about stress in the military. They don't like to talk about stress so much. And we were doing a focus group with warrants and sergeants in Kingston, Ontario. So it's all fairly senior people. And you could tell just from their attitude as they came in the room, they were just thrilled to come in and talk to a psychologist for 2 hours. They were so happy to be. Oh, it was one of the worst mornings of my life. Anyways, at the end, because we had them talk about stress for 2 hours, and we didn't want to send them home depressed. So at the end, we said, let's go once around the table. Tell me the best day you ever spent in the military. And this one guy is a chief warrant officer, an RSM, Regimental Sergeant Major, and he said, you know, the best day I ever had, 37 years in the military, was a change of command parade at Kingston. One colonel's going out, new guys coming in. And they do this parade thing. You've seen the Queen do this, inspecting the troops, right? So they're all lined up in the parade square, and they're going on, and they stop every second or third person and talk. Anyways, the new general or whatever stopped in front of this guy and said, so what do you do for us, Chief? What's your job? So the guy explained what he did for his job, and the general stuck out his hand and he said, thank you. And he walked away, and the guy said, and that's the best day I've ever had in 37 years. So, we can learn one of two things. One, life in the military sucks. If that's your best day, think about your worst. Oh my God. Or think about how important that is. Think about how important that is that someone acknowledges your work, takes the time to say thank you. The other goal we set for leaders all the time, tell 5 people a day they're doing a good job. It's a sneaky thing to do, because they think, well, what possible effect can that have on people just to hear that they're having a good job? Well, A, it does have an effect, but the real difference is actually in the leader. Because you know what? Most people in organizations are doing the right thing most of the time, and we never hear about it. You mess up once. That's when you hear about it, right? So we're really good at pointing at the bad things. We're really good at giving the constructive feedback. What about just giving positive feedback? That's treating people like people. If you're at home, you can't follow someone around criticizing everything they do. Or if you do, you're going to be in trouble. Right? Works the same in the workplace. Nobody needs that. So it's that notion of just recognizing that people are people. They have interests outside of work. They have lives outside of work. They have the same needs that all of us have. I think if we can get leaders doing those 4 things, to return to the original theme of how do you create a climate of inclusion,